Lina and the Library of Wonders, a tale of courage and genius. In a gray and ordinary town where the streets were dull and the skies rarely brightened, there lived a girl who was anything but ordinary. Her name was Lina, and she had a mind sharper than the thorny bushes outside her window. Lina had a love for books so deep it felt like magic, and perhaps it truly was. She read everything she could find: adventure tales, histories of far-off lands, and stories filled with wonder. The library, a creaky old building at the edge of town, became her sanctuary. Her family, however, was quite the opposite of magical. Mr. Grumble, her father, was a gruff, small man who ran a used car business and spent his evenings counting pennies at the kitchen table. "Books won't sell cars, Lina," he would scold. "Stop wasting time on those silly stories." Mrs. Grumble, her mother, cared more for curling her hair and winning games on television. "Why don't you do something useful?" she'd say. "Like learning to impress people." But Lina ignored them, escaping into the pages of her books, dreaming of adventures far beyond the confines of her home and school. Her only real friend was Mrs. Mayhew, the kindly librarian who encouraged Lina's insatiable curiosity. "You have a special mind, my dear," Mrs. Mayhew often told her. "Keep reading, and you'll find something extraordinary." One rainy afternoon, Lina discovered just how right Mrs. Mayhew was. In the darkest corner of the library, Lina stumbled upon an ancient book with a golden cover that shimmered faintly in the dim light. The title read, "The Key to Imagination." Intrigued, Lina opened it, and as she did, the air around her seemed to hum. The words glowed softly, and the pictures on the pages seemed to shift and move. As she read, she whispered, "I wish I could see this world for real." To her astonishment, the lamp beside her flickered, and from the book rose a glowing, golden butterfly. It fluttered around her head, leaving a trail of sparkling light. Lina gasped, her heart pounding. "It's real," she whispered. "It's really real." Over the following days, Lina practiced with her newfound gift, discovering that her imagination could bring to life small, wondrous things from the stories she read. She summoned tiny stars, dancing fairies, and glowing flowers, always careful to do so only in secret. She knew that if her parents or anyone at school found out, they wouldn't understand. At school, things were as grim as they were at home, thanks to the dreaded principal, Mrs. Grindle. Tall and angular, with sharp features and an even sharper tongue, Mrs. Grindle ruled with fear. She delighted in punishing students for the smallest infractions, and she especially disliked Lina. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Mrs. Grindle sneered one day after catching Lina reading during lunch. "Books won't save you from discipline. Tomorrow, you'll stay after school and clean every chalkboard in this building." That night, Lina returned to the library. She was furious but determined. "If Mrs. Grindle wants to teach me a lesson," she muttered, "I'll teach her one first." The next afternoon, as Mrs. Grindle loomed over her in the empty classroom, Lina held her broom and bucket tightly. She took a deep breath, focused her thoughts, and let her imagination take over. Suddenly, the chalkboards came to life. Letters danced across the surface, forming glowing words that spelled out, "Kindness is the greatest strength." The erasers floated into the air, erasing and writing the words over and over. Mrs. Grindle gasped as the broom began sweeping on its own, and the bucket tipped, spilling water in perfect circles around her feet. "What is this sorcery?" she shrieked, backing into the corner as more words appeared. "Treat others with respect, or face the consequences of your cruelty." Mrs. Grindle fled, shouting about haunted classrooms and vowing to retire early. Lina couldn't stop laughing. For the first time, the fearsome principal had met her match. News of Mrs. Grindle's strange departure spread quickly, and the school began to change. Lina used her powers to brighten the dreary hallways with enchanted murals that moved like living paintings. She filled the garden with magical flowers that glowed softly at night, turning it into a peaceful refuge for students. Books began flying through the halls, delivering stories to curious children who had never known the joy of reading. At home, Lina's parents remained as dismissive as ever, until one evening, when Lina decided to show them the magic she had kept hidden. She created a flock of glowing birds that filled the living room with soft light. Her parents stared, their jaws dropping.
How? How did you do that?
Mr. Grumble stammered. Books, Lina said simply. The stories I've read have taught me to see beyond what's in front of me. Mrs. Grumble, for once, had nothing to say. Instead, she picked up one of Lina's books and began flipping through the pages. From that day forward, the Grumble household began to change. Her parents, though clumsy readers at first, grew curious about the worlds Lina loved so much. They even visited the library with her on weekends. Lina's powers grew stronger with time, but she never used them selfishly. She became the heart of her school and town, sharing the magic of imagination and kindness wherever she went. The library transformed into a vibrant hub of creativity, with children and adults alike discovering the wonders of stories. And Lina, the extraordinary girl with a sharp mind and a golden heart, proved that imagination wasn't just magic, it was the most powerful force in the world. Vocabulary words: extraordinary, very unusual or special. Example: Lina was an extraordinary girl with a sharp mind. Dismissive, showing a lack of interest or respect. Example: Lina's parents were dismissive of her love for books. Devour, to eat quickly or eagerly. Example: Lina devoured books like others ate snacks. Shimmer, to shine with a soft light. Example: the words in the book began to shimmer magically. Fearsome, frightening or scary. Example: Mrs. Grindle was the most fearsome principal in town. Enchanted, magical or full of wonder. Example: Lina enchanted the garden, making it bloom with flowers. Courage, the ability to face fears bravely. Example: Lina used her courage to stand up to Mrs. Grindle. Imagination, the ability to create ideas or images in your mind. Example: Lina's imagination brought her books to life. Transform, to change completely. Example: Lina transformed the school into a happier place. Legacy, something passed down or remembered. Example: Lina's legacy was her kindness and creativity.